Welcome to the Dark Mind Podcast. Friends and familiars, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Dark Mind Podcast, where we explore the boundless realm of dark literature and film. On today's show, I have a writer that has written a supernatural thriller where reality frays at the edges and the truth is just another illusion. He's joining me today to discuss his upcoming novel entitled Senseless. So without further ado, join me as we delve into the dark insight of Ronald Malfi. All right, friends and familiars, we are live on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook with Ronald Malfi, here to discuss his upcoming novel, Senseless. Ronald, welcome to the show.
Vince, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. This is great.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on this 12th day of January 2025.
Is that what day this is?
I've lost track. So I initially wanted to discuss your work, Small Town Horror, but my attention was completely derailed when you sent me a copy of your upcoming novel, Senseless. The characters were the epitome of the morally gray, the setting was decadent, and the world you created brimmed with the cynicism of classic noir. So I thoroughly enjoyed it and appreciate you being on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for that glowing endorsement.
Absolutely. I'm sure it's not the first one you've gotten.
This is the first publicity thing I've done for this book, because it comes out in April, so happy to talk about it.
All righty. Well, the book is about a detective named Bill Renney. The story begins with his arrival at a murder scene where they find a woman who has been brutally murdered, almost identical to a woman found over a year ago. The details of the previous murder were not released to the general public, so only the killer would know how to recreate them. And Renney had been in contact with the husband of the previous victim, a man named Alan Anderson, who had been conducting his own investigation into his wife, Melissa Jean Anderson's murder. So through his association with Renney, Alan discovers that the woman's murder is eerily similar to his wife's case, which suggests that the killer is still at large and could still be caught. And this revelation is where the story begins. So Renney and Alan have the shared trauma of being in what's referred to as the Dead Wives Club. Grief often manifests in unique ways. What aspects of their respective losses do you think make Renney and Alan particularly suited or unsuited for working together?
Yeah, and I'll mention that I think everything you just said about the story there is all in chapter 1, so it's nice and tidy. These are two guys from very different walks of life. Alan is a wealthy psychiatrist to the stars out in Hollywood, and Bill Renney is a middle-aged police detective. And really, the only thing that does unite them is Renney's compassion for and his mutual understanding of Anderson having lost his wife, and which Bill has also lost his before the book begins. And they share that commonality. And I think that, there's a leverage there to their relationships. I think in some degree, it brings them a little closer together and they understand each other. But in another degree, it's also a vehicle for manipulation. If someone has that sort of, if you want to consider that compassion to be a weakness, in particularly Bill Renney's job as an investigator, that becomes sort of this tenuous, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Are they really friends, or are they, just keeping each other closer to see what's going on? And I like that dynamic between the two of them.
Kind of a mutual manipulation.
Yeah, exactly. Or is it, or is it not? And that's the thing. And I kind of like leaving that question out there.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So did you intend for your readers to see Renney's grief as a weakness or a strength or something more nuanced?
I think everything should be a little nuanced. And it comes out in the storyline early on that Renney's grief and period of mourning after his wife dies has clouded his judgment looking into the murder of Melissa Jane Anderson. And he recognizes that. And so does her husband. And I play a little bit with timeline, and I kind of jump back and forth from the present to like a year earlier in the book. And you can see how that has an effect on him, how his wife's death has affected him, not just as a person, but as an investigator who's charged with looking into someone else's death when he's still grieving the loss of his own wife. So, I mean, it's a hindrance to him to getting his job done.
Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to remember, what was the timeline of Renney's wife who succumbed very quickly to cancer, and Alan's? Yeah,
it's about I want to say like a few months, maybe 3 months between the two deaths. Yeah.
So they're in the Dead Wives Club, as well as it being close enough together that they're kind of in the same stages of grief. Just for different reasons. I think Alan, there's a scene where Alan even says to Renney, we're in the same place. You might just be a little further down the road than me. Yeah. Well, a parallel storyline running alongside Renney and Alan's is the story of Maureen. Maureen is the fiance of a famous Hollywood producer and appears to suffer from a severe case of obsessive compulsive disorder, at least on the surface. She's very anxious and constantly rearranging things in an attempt to create symmetry and order, which adds one of the many psychological elements to the plot. So, did Maureen's character give you an opportunity to explore aspects of psychological horror that weren't as prominent in Renney and Alan's story? And can you kind of expand on that a little?
Yeah, and it's funny. This novel has 3 different parallel storylines, and I'm sure we'll get to the third one after Maureen's story. But my intention was to write this book with each of these storylines, as they work independently, all kind of pay tribute to a specific subgenre. Where with Renney's storyline, it's that noir detective thriller aspect. With Maureen's storyline, I wanted it to go more of the domestic thriller style, the psychological domestic thriller style of subgenre. And then for the third one, once we get to that crazy fella, I wanted to go kind of gothic LA horror. So I wanted to touch on all those. So it was a very deliberate, even the way I write all those segments, the tone is very deliberate. The elements that I dwell on or things that how they come up, they're very specific to the subgenres that each of those sections are written in. So yeah, it was a very conscious thing to do it that way.
So yeah, I didn't even key in on that. You've got 3 subgenres within a genre assigned to 3 different parallel stories. Like, I guess the genre would it be more of a thriller or horror? I'm not talking about the 3 within, like the one, the parent
book itself.
Yeah.
Hey man, like if you could figure that out, let my publishers know. We're constantly, is this a horror novel or a thriller or what? It's a dark kind of suspenseful atmospheric book. And I think that you could call it a horror novel. You can call it a thriller. You can call it a detective noir novel. It's got all of those elements. It's kind of unique, I think, and it's a little hard to pigeonhole, which is really one of the main things that interests me about writing it. When I first thought of this story, it was just Bill Renney and Alan Anderson's story. And I sat on it for a while. I'm like, what do I want to do with this? I don't want to just write a cop procedural, it wasn't interesting to me. So it wasn't until I realized, no, I'm going to tap into some of these other characters, these other storylines, emphasize them as their own kind of creature within this story, and then see how I can bring them all together. Because I didn't outline this book, so I was kind of first reader as I'm writing it, right? And just kind of want to see how I'd be able to blend everything in and make all the pieces connect. So that was a lot of fun, and it was challenging too. But, you write enough books and you don't, you try to challenge yourself as a writer first and foremost, I think. So
have they figured out a spot to put it in Barnes and Noble?
I think they're
Whoever's
always
in
going to
charge
keep
of
it.
that.
It's funny. That did come up during a meeting with like the marketing folks. I think, you know what? The plan is to keep it in horror only because they don't want to start separating my name on different shelves throughout the store. So they keep it one section. But, I think even if there is nothing really overtly supernatural in the book. I mean, there's scenes where you could argue it is or it isn't, or it's in someone's head or however it comes across. But I think it's plenty dark enough to appeal to, my audience who reads my stuff and people who are just fans of horror fiction
Definitely.
in general.
Yeah. Well, the cause of Maureen's compulsive behavior is eventually revealed in the story. And did I hear you say you did outline this?
I did not. No.
You did not. Okay.
No.
So when writing Maureen, did you know from the beginning what was driving her compulsive behavior? Or did you just kind of like, I'm going to begin with this, see where the story goes and figure out for myself what's causing it?
Not only did I not know when I first started writing, but I didn't even plan to have her have OCD. It's sort of it became a character trait of hers as I was writing her chapter and didn't know where it was going. I liked it. And I think it added depth to who she was and a little mystery there. And I just went with it and kept it. And then, then it's my job to go, well, why does this exist? And it didn't necessarily need a reason or a payoff. It could just be how she is. But I felt it did. And without giving too much away, there are specific, in each of those 3 different storylines, certain things occur to those characters that mirror each other. And it's hard to go into it without really kind of giving away some spoilers. But
you got me thinking now, though.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of, we could talk more offline, but if you think of almost, if you think of in each of those 3 main characters in those 3 storylines, if you think of who the last people they talk to in each one of their segments, you'll go, oh, okay. So, yeah.
All right. I'm going to try not to think of that because otherwise I'm not going to be able to pay attention to the interview. I've got that parked in the back of my head, though.
Let's remind me when we're done.
Well, Maureen's story you kind of described as what was it, domestic horror? It was like
a domestic thriller, psychological thriller. Yeah.
So the character of her fiance, Greg, seemed like kind of your archetypal, shallow Hollywood executive. And actually where my mind went is Maureen's situation to me had some very distinct less than zero energy to it. If you know what I'm, less than zero, like Ellis, especially with the introduction of Greg's son, Landon. Mm-hmm. So was the less than zero energy in Maureen's story something you consciously drew from, or are you a fan of Ellis and his nihilistic yuppies, or the whole kind of decadent Hollywood atmosphere, but especially, that nihilistic character of Landon?
Yeah, I mean, nothing specific. I mean, I love Bret Easton Ellis's books. I think most recently had reread Lunar Park, which I think is a really clever book. And the reason I do reread stuff like that when I'm working on a project is because that's the world I want to immerse myself in. I didn't know very much about Los Angeles or the different characters that populate this story. So it was a lot of kind of learning on my end, or relying on people who live there, who I'm friends with, who could feed me information. And I mean, you're not wrong. I think I use an Ellis quote in the beginning of the book, from American Psycho. I like that sort of, modern Gatsby, that decadent, pompous, entitled nihilism, particularly for the characters in that storyline. So yeah, I was channeling some of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I mentioned, he had some very dark, nihilistic energy. Do you see Landon as purely a destructive force in the story, or does his dark energy kind of reveal deeper truths about other characters and the world they inhabit?
Well, I don't think those are mutually exclusive. I think that he is a destructive force. There's really no question. But like any sort of destructive force, the people who have to contend with that are sort of having their mettle tested, right? And I think that, in the long run, Maureen's story would end quite differently, not just because of what Landon does throughout, but just the introduction of his character into her life kind of makes her reevaluate the decisions she's currently making. And again, I'm trying to just there's a lot of plot points that are also twists in the novel, so I'm trying to walk around.
Yeah. Yeah. What was? I don't think this would produce any spoilers, but what was Greg, the father? What was his relationship with his son? Because I know his son is quite something to deal with. But as far as I remember a point being made that he had no pictures of Landon anywhere in the house. And so was he like a dirty secret? Was he just something he didn't want to deal with? I mean...
Well, Landon is basically the antithesis of what this guy is trying to accomplish with his life. And he's sort of saddled with this kid. Not kid, I mean, the guy, he's like 25 in the book, but he's just a consummate problem, not just because of things he does offhandedly, but because Landon is bent on derailing his father, and, while, you said Landon is a destructive force, but there's a lot of truth in what he says, particularly when he talks to Maureen. Yeah, he's full of bullshit and lies and tries to provoke her. But there's also a lot of truth in what he says, particularly when it comes to his father. So yeah, I think Greg is just this guy who is trying to keep his head above water in a financial industry that's cutthroat, that he's trying to carve a way through, being this producer of these middle budget horror films. And he's got multiple divorces under his wing, and he's got all this baggage that he polishes and puts a big smile on his face to kind of overthink. And then Landon, like a bulldozer, keeps re-entering his life. So that's their pattern. That's the situation between them. I think I lost track of what the question was.
No, you got it. I mean, and like you said, he's full of bullshit, but he also tells the truth. But when he tells the truth, he weaponizes it.
Yeah,
that's true. It's like a spear.
No, that's a good point. You're right. Yeah.
Well, when you describe Landon's mannerisms, you do it in such a detailed way that I just feel like I can visualize them perfectly. And I feel like they can only be seen one way. Like they're not even open up for interpretation. I know I'm incorrect in that, but visually, that's kind of the way I feel. So who or what did you draw from to bring his character to life? Because even one of my favorite parts of the book, and I'm not going to describe the situation, but you'll know what I'm talking about, is when Maureen is kind of hiding and she hears him moving around and he says, "Good night, mother." It's that guy. That is,
Yeah, that was just I'm like, what would be the creepiest fucking thing this kid could do right now? and that was it. Yeah. The thing with him is visually, it's rare that characters come to my mind so visually clear, so physically formed when I'm writing them. Landon did. He just popped in there. And he was a combination of an old bass player I used to have and I think the singer from Better Than Ezra. I kept picturing those two guys kind of coming together just for their physical attributes. This sort of angular, wiry, tall, athletic, but almost effeminate, man. He's 25, and then as I was writing it, and I think it might have been the first, when I wrote it and I sent it to my editor and he did his first draft of edits and reviews, a review of the book. And he came back and he noted something, which I didn't realize I was doing deliberately, but he goes, every time you describe him as some sort of animal, whether it's a lion yawning in the zoo or a cat slinking lazily across the baseboard or something. And I'm like, wow, I guess I did, which does have a particular payoff later on in the story, but I didn't even realize I was doing it on purpose. And I realized I was kind of honing in on all of his animalistic, his base traits, that sort of those reptile brain reflexes that we all do. He's made up of those, and so I kind of leaned into that a little more than for some rewrites.
So one thing revealed about Maureen is that she had written a novel before and currently has another work in progress. And she describes her work in progress to some of Greg's associates at their engagement party, and it appears to be a psychological horror story. So do you think Maureen's novel in progress offers readers a glimpse into her psyche, or is it deliberately ambiguous?
Well, it starts off extremely ambiguous, and I don't think she even personally knows where it's going. And the payoff in that kind of novel within a novel is the reveal, like a reveal about her character towards the end of the book and what she's really writing about. And I just wanted to frame it in a way that to some degree shows because that's how I write, shows the ambiguity of the creative process when you're putting things together. And then how at the end, even without her as the creator realizing it, it snaps into clarity for her and for my readers, when it's almost brought to her attention by someone else to tell her what her story is really about. Again, it's tough to talk about without giving away a spoiler, but I think it's, it was very, I had to be very particular about how I wrote those segments without giving too much away, but making sure the ending was understandable enough where someone could understand, what I was trying to say.
Gotcha. Well, does her impulse to write relate to other compulsive behaviors, like her need for symmetry and order? Is there some need for catharsis there?
You know what? At first there was. So the first draft I wrote, she had this tick where I forget what letter it was on the keyboard. May have been a W. I don't remember, but she couldn't stop hitting it. So when I would write the segments of her novel in the book itself, I think it was the W's would all be like, there'd be 5 in a row every time it came up. And I was going to use that later as a payoff on something where you knew she wrote it because of the W thing. It just got a little convoluted and messy, and I'm like, all right, I don't think it's necessary. So I kind of scrubbed that. But yeah, it's all part of her. Look, writing is a very obsessive compulsive, when we call it business or job, it's work. And I'm very lax and lazy about a lot of things in life. But when it comes to writing, I'm just meticulous. I'm one of those guys that'll stare at a sentence and put a comma in there and then 2 hours later go back like, no, I got to take that comma out. I take it out and I just sit and think about it. So yeah, so that's got an element of obsessive compulsive disorder to it, I think, as well. So it seemed fitting for her to behave that way. But yeah, I kind of dialed back some of the stuff in the writing portions just because it was too messy for the story's sake.
So because you have that nature, do you bump heads with your editors? Like, no, I am not killing this darling, you son of a bitch.
I have been generally very lucky to have editors who understand what I do and don't impede too much. Their edits are very respectful. I guess I'll say. In turn, I also, because I'm that meticulous about it, I tend to give them a very clean manuscript. I don't really give them something where I'm like, yeah, it falls apart in Act 3 and I'm going to need you to really help me. I never do that. They're getting almost a finished book. So I will. Titan is a UK publisher and their punctuation is slightly different. And I'm a stickler for punctuation. So I think this goes back, not so much on this book because we've got a routine down now, but the first book I did with them was Come With Me. And the copy, not my main editor, but the copy editor after the fact took out all of my Oxford commas throughout the whole manuscript. And I'm like, no. Go put them back in. So yeah, I'm a little particular about that, but yeah, I'm also fairly easygoing.
It must be a tedious task to replace commas.
You know what? And it's sort of, I assume a lot of writers do this, but I provide like editors with my own style sheet. Like, hey, just so you know, when you're reading my stuff, if it's written this way, it's written this way on purpose. This is how I want to use it. I use a lot of like M dashes in place of colons in my prose, just stylistically. It's my preference, I remember years ago when I first started, someone gave me Jack Ketchum's style preference thing that he would give to editors. I'm like, and it's written in only the way Jack Ketchum could write it. There's like the one that stands out was he wrote, I never capitalized mom and dad, call me disrespectful. Like, that's so great.
Well, I've been diligently seeking here. So which guy?
It's him right there. You're certain.
This guy right here? Okay.
Yeah, he's also the guy playing the guitar to the left. That's the same guy.
This one right here?
Yeah. That's got a little Landon going. Look at that. Better than Ezra. Are they still around? I used to go, me and my buddy used to go and like see this band all the time. Yeah, he's like second from the left there. There he is, right there.
Yeah.
See, it's Landon. Very Landon-y.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, let's see here. Oh, this is something I don't know if any of your other readers, if your ARC readers or whatever, happen to mention this, but in the book, when she starts to explain the plot of her new story, did you ever consider like cutting that out and making it a separate story? Like, wait a minute, this is really fucking good. I think I'm going to come up with something else, and then this will be the next book.
It started that way. In fact, I had mentioned that story idea when I was with somebody, and I'm like, I said, I'm thinking about writing a short story based on this. I didn't really know where to go with it. And when I got to that section of writing this novel, like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stick it here and see if it works. And I got the thumbs up. It worked.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, it's funny you say that. Yeah, it started off that way.
Yeah, I'd be tempted to be like, oh, God, this is good. I think this is a novel. I'm going to come up with something a little bit more low-key. Well, as the story progresses, you realize that Renney is a very morally gray character. Do you think Renney's moral ambiguity makes him more human and relatable to readers, or does it create distance?
I mean, I hope it does both. And I know I've been answering all your questions kind of like that. You don't want, nobody is all good or all bad. And, everybody's got these sort of gray areas. And I think what makes them, you don't have to have a likable character or necessarily, I mean, my book, Small Town Horror, the whole book is about unlikable characters, but I think you have to make them relatable. And those are two different things. And I think if you're able to pull off having someone who's a morally gray character, or even someone who's not a very likable person, if you have them relatable, you find that the audience does still follow along with their story, because they can kind of get where this person's coming from. And they have some, they invest themselves a little bit in it as readers to see where their story goes. I think generally, I think, Renney is a good character. He's a good person. But, people act the way they act when they're put in certain positions. And that was something he did, and I don't necessarily even, I think the act in particular that you're talking about, again, we're like, this book is nothing but, it's like a landmines of spoilers. Yeah. But the act that you're talking about even that is gray, I think. I don't think it's black and white, what he does. So, I like that. I like not knowing how I feel about some of these people sometimes, it's cool.
Well, did you envision his morally gray nature, for lack of a better word or term, as coming more from personal trauma, or his, I guess, personal trauma would be his situation with his wife, and then from his profession, just kind of absorbing all that darkness?
I don't think he would have done what he did if not for his wife having died.
Okay.
That's my take. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, now we come to subgenre number 3. One of the most important characters in the book, a man named Toby Campen. Is it Campen?
Campen, yeah.
Campen. Lives in a very surreal and terrifying reality. A self-proclaimed fly, and I don't think no spoilers. I saw that in the description of the book on Amazon. Toby interacts with 2 women who do not seem to be human themselves. So were Toby's perceptions meant to be understood as psychological or supernatural, or are they meant to keep the reader in suspense? And Listeners at home, by that question, I'm not saying it's one way or the other. I'm just trying to envision what he was trying to kind of lead the reader into.
Yeah, I mean, I built his story here's a 22-year-old kid who's convinced that he's a living human housefly. And he meets a woman at a bar who he believes is a vampire. And he becomes her familiar and operates in that way. And this is a clearly disturbed individual. And, hey, you read the segments with him, and if a reader comes away and says, "Now this is all real and this is all literal horror," great. Or if you come away going, "This kid is seriously psychologically damaged, and this is how we're seeing the world through his perception," great. That's great too. There's elements that come up towards the end of his storyline that sort of settle on one over the other. But I was meticulous about walking that line throughout writing his segments throughout the novel, just to keep that balance of, is it or isn't it? It's tougher to do it that way, but it makes it more fun. And I think a lot of my stuff to some degree does that. So I've become a little adept at kind of doing it. But I had a lot of fun, and his scenes are a little disturbing and weird, but they were kind of fun to write too.
I bet. Well, all three characters, or actually maybe more than that, it seems like quite a few of the characters seem to be grappling with their own sense of reality. So was there an underlying message that you were trying to convey with this theme of perception and truth?
To a degree, and it's interesting you mentioned that. So there is it was an idea that occurred to me when, a year before the novel starts, Bill Renney investigates Alan Anderson's wife's murder. When the book opens, he's investigating a second murder that's done the same way. And they're both these inexplicable, the first murder was never solved. It's sort of inexplicable how these bodies wound up in this condition, in this location, without any evidence on them at all. And Bill then harkens back to something his wife, before she died, something she had said to him about I forget how I phrased it in the novel, but it has to do with like the great cosmic echo, that she said, what if the world is only built up of a finite amount of numbers? And she uses numbers as an example and says, it's only a matter of time before those numbers will begin to repeat. And something that exists in a certain way is going to re-exist somewhere else, because that's the cyclical nature of this cosmic echo, right? And he's too dense really to understand what she's telling him at the time. But he does kind of impart that upon himself when he's dealing with these two separate murders that might be connected or might not. And he starts thinking about that more and more. So as a writer, then, as I look at thematically what I'm saying with this book, I kind of exploit that to a degree throughout the novel for all three of the main characters. And they're all very subtle, but there are, for each of those storylines, there's a phrase, I think, that's uttered to each of them in a degree that is similar to in the other two storylines. So they all share that. There is, it's not really giving anything away for me to say that there's a particular character who shows up wearing an inverted cross on a chain.
That was brilliant. I'm not going to say, but
so the inverted cross on the chain appears in both other storylines. For one, it's on a church at one point, where in the desert, it's an inverted cross on the door.
Oh, okay.
And then in Renney's storyline, when him and Toby Campin's stories are about to connect, and he sees Toby drive up in this van, there's a crack in the windshield that he comments looks like an inverted cross with the way the light hits it. So I was doing all these deliberate symbolic sort of gestures throughout all of that to kind of enhance that idea of this sort of great cosmic echo, these things that come full cycle. And, and I guess by the end of the book, it brings Bill Renney a little bit of solace in that it lets him believe that means at some point he'll see his wife again. If that's how the world works, at some point there'll be another crossover for the two of them. Yeah, I mean, I was conscious of that throughout. It's interesting you picked that up. Yeah. Sometimes I add these little things in there, and I'm like the only guy who notices them.
Yeah, the cosmic echo, it makes me think about, I don't think it's the multiverse theory they talk about. I think they were just talking about the universe being infinite, like there's no end. So there's only so many different particles, so many different states of matter, to where eventually eons and eons of time away, they all reconverge at the same time. And me and you are having the same conversation somewhere else
Sure,
simultaneously.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Or, I mean, how many different looking people can there be? Eventually, someone who's completely unrelated to someone else is going to look just like that person, just like the singer from Better Than Ezra and my old bass player.
Have you ever been shown or ran across your doppelganger? Like,
I've had people say I look like a lot of people, nothing too close. But yeah, no, I don't know. I don't often see it, but
maybe there's not a big enough population on the earth. We'll have to branch out to. But yeah, the inverted cross, Maureen's experience with the inverted cross was definitely the most impactful. That one really, it's like, boom. Okay. So listeners at home, you'll have to read. I'm not saying anything more. Well, so you gave Renney the backstory of having a deceased wife who was diagnosed with cancer and quickly succumbed to the illness. And it's very common for people to throw themselves into their work to cope when they're in the throes of grief. So in Renney's case, his grief actually hindered his investigation and caused him significant trouble. Do you believe Renney finds any form of resolution or peace by the end of the novel, or does his grief remain an ongoing battle?
I'd like to say that there is resolution for his grief. He's sort of given the go-ahead to move on. And I think for him, his takeaway from all this is his acknowledgement that he fucked up, that he was not in the headspace to do this. And had he been in a different place, things may have turned out differently. So he owns that responsibility, which it's a little more of an ambiguous, he's not fighting the bad guy on the side of a mountain at the end of the book, but it's more of this sort of inner back and forth that he's been dealing with since his wife's death. And I think he, by the end of the book, acknowledges that, just like there's a lot of truth in what Landon says to people, there's a lot of truth in what Alan Anderson says to him by the end of the book. And it's hard to refute that for him. And I think he owns it by the end of the novel. So I think for me, it works.
Yeah, Alan and Landon can really get in your head. Well, when it comes to writing Los Angeles as a setting, you mentioned that you received a lot of research assistance from author Philip, is it Fracassi?
Fracassi, yes.
Fracassi, okay.
Oh, yeah.
What were some of the elements and aspects you consulted him about, and what was the most surprising thing you learned about Los Angeles?
You know what? I'm very good friends with Philip. He is a fantastic writer, and I knew he lived out in Los Angeles and actually worked for Hollywood he would scout locations, so he knew some really great spots, particularly that Antelope Valley, that desert area that I was writing about. He knew about it. And, we had a phone call. I said, here's what I'm doing. I was fairly general. I'm like, look, I need to know like the distance between here. Like if I'm in downtown LA, how long would it take me to get to this location? Or, hey, I've got this wealthy psychiatrist character where would he live? And I need him to live in a house in this particular area. I mean, he not only gave me answers to that, but went out and took photos, pulled up detailed maps. He gave me, he let me see images from his Hollywood scouting stuff of those locations. So that I mentioned it quite a few times in the novel, the Los Angeles city limits sign right by the desert. That's in a photo that he sent me. I'm like, oh, that's great. I got to use that. The church is out there. He told me about, and just nuances about the heat, the ants. There are these like fire ants that'll bite you, all this kind of stuff. That was just, and it's nothing, I'm never impressed by like big things like, Los Angeles has a population. I don't care about that. I like the nuances. I like hey, you got to tuck the cuffs of your pants into your socks. Otherwise the ants will bite your ankles. I love shit like that. Writers love that stuff, right? Because it's so genuine. And I would never know of that on my own. So he was a huge help with that. And then when I finished the book and I had a copy sent to him, I'm like, hey, if I fucked any of this up, don't tell me. It's done. So he was kind not to say anything. But I take full responsibility. It's not him, it's me, if anything's messed up.
Gotcha. So I think I kind of got this screwed up. I thought I remembered you saying not only that you were more of a pantser, but that you like to kind of like Sun Tzu, Art of War, back yourself up into a state of no retreat. Like you've got a body of water to your back, like your deadline is in 3 months or something like that. Was I misremembering that?
I won't say I like it, but you're accurate. Yeah, I always find myself in that position. I have generally about a year to write a novel, and I take about 8 months of that just kind of moping around the house and thinking about stuff, and and I'll 3 or 4 months to actually do the writing part. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so the reason I bring it up is, having done this research, there was some additional, like, I don't know what you regularly do in the form of research for your novels, but it sounds like you...
Very little.
It sounds like you kind of get in this stream of consciousness, like... Mm-hmm. So since you had to take the time to research some unfamiliar territory, how did the writing of this novel differ from your usual method?
You know what? It wasn't necessarily so much on the research that made aspects of writing this different. I am generally, because I don't have an outline, I write kind of by feel, and I go where the story kind of takes me. So I write in order. I start with chapter 1, I end with the last chapter, and I go through it that way. With this one, I actually hit a spot in the middle. And because it is all these 3 separate stories that kind of bounce back and forth in these different chapters, I hit a roadblock in one of them, and I had to do a little research and wait for some phone calls to have an answer for it. And I'm like, well, fuck, I can't just sit here and not do this. So I wound up writing one of the other storylines. I think it was Toby's storyline that I wrote then all the way through before putting it back and kind of snapping the pieces back and deciding where the chapters went. It's the first time I've ever done that. I don't particularly like doing it that way because I don't get the sense of that flow until I go back and read it. I like to know it like in the moment. So it was a little jarring for me to do it that way, but I know me, and I know I'll take any opportunity to sit on my ass and not do anything. So I had to get that done while I was waiting for the other stuff to come through.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Well, kind of piggybacking off of the aspect of research, I'm not a law enforcement officer, but I feel like I can usually suss out a police procedure that's bogus, like something that would never happen in real life. And the procedure depicted in your novel seems very authentic. So did you do research along with that?
I know plenty of law enforcement guys who are more than happy to tell me that I've gotten something wrong. So gotcha. I propose an idea, and then I run it by some folks, and I go, okay. I'm usually, there's a lot of stuff in that's sort of common sense, I guess, that I rely on. So law enforcement guys are great to tell you when you've gotten something incorrect.
Gotcha. Well, so you do describe yourself as a pantser, but are you more of a pantser that has kind of like a scaffolding outline, like you've got some bones set up and you pants within, or is it just completely like Jack Kerouac on the road?
Yeah. Well, every book's a little different, but in general, I don't really write down anything until I write chapter 1 and start with that sentence. So there's no note. I used to years and years ago have notebooks full of all these, not so much novels, but like bizarre ideas and just all over the place. Now I just kind of sit and think these things through, and these stories kind of come together from a variety of places. It's like, I'll think of the characters that are going to populate it and what they're like and how they would behave and what situations I'd find them in, what their names are, what they look like. And then I'll think of the story that I want to tell, not the plot, but the story in general. Right. And I just think about it ad nauseum, just all these little pieces of it coming together. In my head, it's sort of like building a chair where the legs aren't totally screwed tight yet, and it's wobbly, but it's starting to feel like a chair. It's starting to feel like a story. And then really when I sit down to write is when I get the first two sentences have to jump in my head. The first sentence, which I'm like, okay, good, that's a good start. And then the second sentence that links to that and kind of opens the door to the rest of the story. And that's when I know when I'm ready to go. Once I have those two sentences, then I sit down and start typing.
Okay. Well, kind of a origin of consciousness question. You are both a writer and a musician. So were there any elements in the writing of this novel that you feel were influenced by your musical side?
So in a completely like literal sense, I don't really put a lot of music nods in my writing, nor are the songs I write very horror. So they don't really, there's not a lot of crossbreeding with that stuff. But I will say that I'm very hypersensitive to cadence and tone and all the things that you use when you're writing music and writing a song, even a 3.5 minute pop song or whatever, all those things need to be in place. And I'm conscious of that when I'm writing books too. Like the language has to be there, the exposition, everything's got to kind of fall in place. And there's lines of dialogue that I've sometimes used that I'm like, I don't know if anybody would actually say it that way, but boy, it just has a bounce to it that works in this particular moment. So I'm conscious of it that way. And I kind of let it breathe the way a song would breathe, how it wants to kind of build and crescendo. And like when you think of writing a song, you picture it's like, you have verse, chorus, bridge, and then that big explosive double chorus, and that's kind of how I do it. Same thing with a book. It's like all those peaks and valleys. And I know that if one of those things, if I don't have that big crescendo or the bridge or something, the book will fall apart too. It's the same as building a song. So I approach it that way.
Yeah, I honestly, I was like, I wonder what could possibly be the answer to that question if there is one. And cadence, I was like, of course, it seems so obvious, but it didn't even pop into my mind. But yeah. Well, how many novels are you up to now? And have there been any recurring themes that you've noticed?
What is Senseless? Is Senseless number 20, maybe? I think. Yeah, 20. You know what? My themes, there are kind of recurring things that I always have. Like, man, I don't know. I'm good for a dead spouse. I'm good for a dead parent. I got a lot of grief elements in my work. My stuff tends to be kind of character over plot driven. I love a good thick atmosphere. So I like all those sort of embellishments. And I was called a horror writer early on in my career, and some of my earlier stuff is much more seated in that genre. But I think as I've gotten more progressed as an author, I find I'm more interested in people who believe in the supernatural and in crazy shit than actually writing about the literal supernatural and crazy shit. I like that measure of ambiguity, that sort of patina of, is this real or not? That kind of follows through. And I think most of my more recent books have that in common, I'd say.
Gotcha. Well, let me bring this up. The cover to your book is solid. Did you have anything to do with the concept for this, or?
Nothing really to do with this. They normally send you a couple of mock-up covers, and they're like, "Oh, what do you think?" And then usually I'm like, "Yeah, that one's good. Maybe change this or that," and then they do it. For this one, I think this might have been, was it 6? They may have done like a dozen different covers. And I'm like, no, because they were all very, it was like the Los Angeles cityscape or the desert, at sundown. They looked like a Western novel, and I'm like, no, it's got to be more, if you didn't know me and know what the book is about, you wouldn't say this is a cover of a horror novel, or it wasn't really capturing the tone. So with this one, I think they finally got this on there, and there was some back and forth about the amount of gore that they could put on the cover, because these books are in all over the place. So like some retailers wouldn't want to stock it, or Amazon wouldn't want to post it, or who knows. So there was a level of gore that they couldn't do, which I wanted it dialed back. I didn't want it to be like this big blood splattery thing, but I think it looks both gory but classy kind of at the same time. So I'm happy with it.
Yeah, until I just blew it up now, I didn't even notice the nose, from the storyline. Yeah. But I think this blood spatter with the skyline imposed into it is just brilliant. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was very happy with it. It's tough to, and you know what? These guys are designing the book covers before they've read the book. I was writing it while that was going on. So, yeah, everything moves a little quick.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure to meet you in person finally at the Texas Author Con.
Yes, it was a good time.
How have the cons been going? I know it sounds like you're you were talking about some music related things from last night, but
yeah. The band played a concert last night, but I don't know, the past year it's been nonstop. I was on the Small Town Horror book tour, and even before that I did some pre-release events, and I've got a book coming out. My publisher says once a year, but it's like kind of every 10 months. So I really just jumped in with both feet for like about a year and a half of being on the road, going to different events, a combination of conventions, bookstore signings, various other events, and trying to maximize my time on the ground when I'm in a particular city, doing an event there. Plus, it's also good for me to I see which ones are worth attending, which ones maybe, okay, this, for the time and money, maybe we skip this one next year, or, stuff like that. But it's been fun. Everybody's been gracious. I've had, nothing but really positive experiences, and it's been a joy to meet people who are reading my stuff, throughout the country, not just like in my hometown. So it's been pretty cool. Yeah.
Have you had any particularly interesting reader interactions? Like, have you met any Toby Campins?
There's always some fucking weirdo out there. Sure. They do. So whenever you go to these conventions and you're a guest there, they'll ask you for input about what, if you would like to do a panel, and what would you like to do a panel on? And kind of tongue in cheek, I was like, you know what? I want to do a panel on what not to say when you come to an author's desk or a table and they're signing books, or what not to do. Don't stand there for 2 hours. Yeah. Don't stand there for 2 hours, touch all my stuff with your Cheeto red fingers, and then walk on, stuff like that. But you know what? But for every, off-putting individual, it happens everywhere, and it's usually just kind of a chuckle, but most everybody else is so great. It's really nice to meet people who are passionate about reading these books and are excited to talk about them, and I like to talk about them too, and just you kind of share in that environment of just the appreciation of storytelling, and it's been really cool.
Awesome. Well, kind of on that same note, are there any new writers out there that have impressed you? Some up and coming?
I mean, if you haven't read Philip Fracassi, I would recommend him. Man, I'm trying to think. You know what? My writing has been my reading has been so limited. I get so many books to blurb that I'm kind of limited there. I read Nat Cassidy's newest one. I don't think it's out yet. It was The Wolf at the Door, I think it's called. That's fantastic. Eminence Front by Rebecca Rowland. That I read an early copy of that. Brilliant book that comes out with Clash, I think, in about a year or so. You know what, man? I could probably sit and think of a whole handful of them. He's not new by any means, but Mallerman's last novel was great. Incidents Around the House, really good. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I could rack my brain here. Tyler Jones is somebody who you could take a look at. His stuff. It's very good. But it's like when back in the day where you used to go to the video store and you're like, I know there's 40 movies I want to watch, but I never remember what they are when I'm actually in the store.
Yeah.
That's what asking about writers is like. It's like, I know there's a bunch. I'll remember later tonight, but yeah.
Well, What has been, I know you said that you played a show last night. What's been going on with your band, VEER?
VEER, well, this is the first show we played since I want to say like midsummer of last year, just because we took a hiatus, some personal reasons with guys and, just people doing stuff in the band. I had the book tour. So he said, let's take a break. So we popped back out and did a show last night and, just getting back into it. We're fortunate as a band to be in a position where we can kind of stay local to the mid-Atlantic region where we live and get picked up for opening acts for like major nationals that come through, Baltimore, DC, Virginia, that sort of thing. But then we have a big enough following out here. We could also headline our own shows and kind of do what we want to do at our own speed. So that's been the luxury of this band, is doing things on our own terms. We're in the early stages right now of working on our third album. So it's all original music. It's all like this sort of alternative, heavy / pop rock kind of stuff. And it's just, writing is a very isolated endeavor. So it's nice to kind of work on something creative with a group of guys that we're all kind of like-minded and have a good time doing it. And you get to actually associate with other people instead of sitting in a dark room by yourself.
What particular, what would the word be, methods of grooming is your brother maintaining so that you can tell you guys apart? Because I know you said if one guy has long hair, the other one has short hair. Like, what's going on?
Yeah, he's less attractive than me, so he doesn't have the beard. I've got this thing going on, right? Okay. But he's got the short hair. Okay. So so it was his. He's like, look, we got people think we're the same person. So see, you're talking about my doppelganger. It's my dumb brother there.
Yeah, let me see. Just for the...
It'd be funny if you thought it was him and you're really just pulling up another picture of me.
Well, I'm hoping to find a band pic. Yeah, here we go.
Yeah, so that's me and him right there.
Yeah. Yeah, so. You do. He's got the short hair, you got the long hair, but you're both clean shaven. So, yeah.
Yep. So... And he's the drummer, and he's also the mouthpiece of the band. He's the one who books all the shows, calls all the shots, and takes care of business. Without him, we'd just be playing in the garage somewhere. So
sweet.
He's the real deal. Yeah.
So the last time I spoke with you, which was a while back, did you have VEER vodka then, or is that relatively new?
No, well, it's been a few years now, so it might have been. Yeah, okay. That was a deal that we struck up with a local distillery. So they licensed the bottle had our band name on it, had our faces were on it, which, our parents are very proud to have there's my kids with their faces on a bottle of liquor. And it also, but my brother's, like I said, he's like a consummate promoter. So like the bottle itself had like a Spotify scan. So you could listen to our music. Like if you took a picture of the bottle and all that. And we did, I can't remember if it was 1,000 boxes or 1,000 bottles that we did with this distillery. And I mean, they were in many of the local liquor stores and the bars around here were all serving it. And like every time you'd walk in there, like VEER vodka would be on the menu and stuff. It's kind of neat. So we did that for a while. And then when the vodka came out, we did a concert at the distillery. So it's like the local radio station sponsored it, and it was a big catered event. It was a lot of fun. It's like a legit red carpet sort of. You show up, you get your free liquor, you watch a concert, you get to hang out and eat and party, and it was a really cool atmosphere. So we did that, and that ran its course. And then most recently, we worked out with Mitch Hull of Rapture Brewing out of Oklahoma, and he did a VEER beer. Which has been awesome. So I think there's only just a few cans of that left, which I guess you can get from their website.
Was it like a lager or?
Yeah, it's a lager. And it's got like this, it's the look of it. I don't have anything lying around. The only thing I have here is an old bottle of Zima. But it's the label looks similar to the album that we released. So it's got like this space theme to it. There's like an astronaut on it and stuff. But it looks really cool and it's delicious. And it comes in those giant metal cans, like those big cans that look like they should be harpooned into the side of Jaws, like those big fuckers, right? So it's really good. So yeah, Rapture Brewing. So you check those boys out if they've got any left. You tell your audience, those big drinkers out there, to go order some.
All right. All right. I know you're a busy man. Last question.
All right.
Have there been any radical changes in your life since we last spoke? Good, bad, like something to shout from the rooftops, like I reached nirvana.
Brother, my life is a radical change.
All
Everything
right.
about it. I don't. I can't. There's not one thing that stands out. I've been very lucky that I'm still able to do this and to have to have people read my stuff, and I'm going to ride it for as long as I can. I mean, I'm enjoying. I'm looking forward to going back on the road in the spring to support Senseless, and I recognize that any of this stuff can just stop at any moment for anyone. So I'm taking the tact of embracing it lovingly and going out there and having fun with it. So I'm very grateful that I'm able to do that.
Memento mori.
Absolutely.
Well, Ronald, it has been a pleasure talking with you as always.
Same, Vince, and I really appreciate having me on. This was great. I was looking forward to it.
Hell yeah. Well, as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug, reiterate, let your both readers and listeners of your music know about?
Yeah, I mean, look, the new book Senseless comes out on April 15th. I believe if you order from Books A Million, their website, you can get a signed hardcover copy from them with like special end papers or something. That's a promotion they were running. And, Small Town Horror is still out there. It's been probably one of my most successful books, and I've had a lot of fun with that. So if you haven't read that one yet, I'd recommend it. And on the band front, I will just plug VEERband.net, and you can see all our music videos, listen to all our songs. You can stream them. You can order all the incredible, ridiculous amount of merchandise that we have. Like, you name it. You want a lunchbox with my face on it? You got it. My brother's a merch whore. He's
Nice.
all over it. So yeah, we've got everything. So those would be my plugs.
All right. Everybody get a lunchbox. That sounds amazing.
You watch. That's like the one thing we don't have.
All right. Well, sounds good. Well, listeners at home, both live and on demand, all links are in the description. And Ronald, thank you again for joining me.
Thanks, Vince.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can watch the episodes live. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest writers and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.